I've been homeless like on and off since I was 16. I was homeless in Glasgow and then came back down to London, and I was homeless on and off, like hostels, the street, refugees, and I having to move because my ex-partner found out where I was. And me and my ex-partner, we were on the streets together, and if I was going to meet my support worker, like, he would say, oh, don't go get her, if you're going to get her, you're not going on your own, and I'm coming with you, whatever. So if he was on the streets, he would hate me going in a hostel or whatever, because like he'd say, oh, we're finished then if you're going in to get some help. My partner didn't want any support. Like, he'd only like want me and him together, like me and him supporting each other. But it was basically like me supporting myself and him not wanting me to get support.
We realised that there was a need for this guidance from speaking to the frontline workers that were working both in our services and other homelessness kind of outreach-based services. What we were hearing from frontline staff was that there was a lot of uncertainty about doing this really complex work, so they were trying to support survivors who may be street homeless with their perpetrators always present, or in kind of housing first settings where there might be multiple perpetrators kind of in the accommodation with them. So really kind of high risk situations, not only for the survivor but for the staff members as well. And you know, there was a real kind of fear and lack of confidence around how best to approach kind of those complex, difficult situations. So staff were kind of saying that they were worried that they would inadvertently kind of collude with perpetrators when they were trying to kind of reach the survivor. They were quite fearful of being kind of abused themselves by perpetrators in some cases. You know, being threatened and verbal abuse was kind of, you know, quite often part of the day-to-day. But I suppose the flip side of that was also staff talking about their experiences of supporting perpetrators who were experiencing multiple disadvantages and how conflicting that could sometimes feel. So to want to kind of offer that, you know, compassionate response and unconditional positive regard, whilst also, you know, holding that perpetrator accountable for the fact that they were using abuse. Really, really difficult and kind of conflicting issues for staff to manage emotionally.
Workers may often feel like they do have to ignore a perpetrator's abusive behaviour to continue working with a survivor. Part of that is because if a perpetrator sees a worker as someone who is, you know, getting in the middle of the relationship, taking away the perpetrator's power and control in any way, it is likely that a perpetrator will try to sabotage the relationship between the survivor and their worker.
I've definitely been co-opted into like an abusive situation, which feels really uncomfortable when you're with someone and their perpetrator's kind of trying to involve you in the controlling behaviour that they've got, trying to include you in this like narrative that they're putting out there that the victim survivor's this or whatever. It's like hard to explain how difficult it is to challenge in the moment when that stuff's happening, because you can't just be like, you're being abusive, you must stop, because that puts the victim survivor at risk and it could put you at risk, but you equally don't want to just say nothing. And particularly if that person is violent, you don't want to, like kick anything off inadvertently.
Partnership working was absolutely key, so obviously Standing Together are a specialist domestic abuse organisation, and we were really pleased to work with SHP and particularly Flick, who work with, you know, people with multiple disadvantage. There's historically been quite a gap between the two, and I think people with multiple disadvantage really do fall through that gap, so I think it was absolutely essential with this project that right at the start of it we brought together professionals from the perpetrator sector, from the women's specialist sector and from the homelessness sector around the table to discuss the issues, and I think that was the first time that all of those sectors had sat around the table together, and I think there was a real acknowledgement of these gaps for survivors but also for perpetrators, because nobody should have to, it's no one organisation's responsibility to respond to domestic abuse. The best response is a partnership response.
Ultimately, we know that there is no way of, completely reducing the risk in these situations. It's not ideal to try and support survivors where their perpetrators are always there. It's always going to be challenging, it's always going to be difficult, but I think the only way that we're going to do that better and more safely is to have a continuing open dialogue of kind of mutual learning, and to learn from the experiences of the clients that we're working with as well, to speak to survivors about, how it felt for them to have workers approach when their perpetrators were there, how to increase their safety, what we shouldn't be asking them.
I feel like I'm still homeless now. I lost a 30-year secure tenancy in Islington over someone I met online. They manipulate you. Yeah, they hold you back. They don't want you to see the outside world. They just hold you back. It's like, I've never been able to get support whilst I've been with a partner, never. They wouldn't allow it to break away. And that's what I'm doing now.
First and foremost, the impact that we want this training and guidance to have is to increase the safety for the survivors that we're supporting and reduce the risks. I think beyond that, what we really would love to see is frontline staff in homelessness settings or in kind of specialist outreach domestic abuse teams feeling more confident in their roles, feeling safer, feeling more able to reach out to survivors and deliver support, even where there is ongoing risk from perpetrators there, and also to feel more confident into holding perpetrators to account around their abusive behaviour where necessary and where obviously it's safe to do so. We really want to see perpetrator kind of training and guidance being kind of mandatory across homelessness settings. There's a real opportunity here to influence organisational policy and get this kind of on the map as an issue which, workers are coming up against on a daily basis.
For a long time, lots of services will not work with survivors if a perpetrator is present, because those situations, it can be unsafe for workers and it can also be unsafe for survivors, for the perpetrator to be present. But in real life, workers can come up with all sorts of random, bizarre, unpredicted situations that they were not prepared to happen. And in those moments, they have to just try and go along with it, do the best they can, and then debrief with management afterwards and reflect on, okay, what went well, what did I do well to manage that situation, what could be improved to manage that situation. There definitely is need for guidance on how to support survivors when there are perpetrators around. But ultimately, if services and workers had a blanket policy where they say, we will not meet the survivor, we will not support the survivor, we will not be around the survivor or speak to them when the perpetrator is around, it means the survivor doesn't get the support they need. Ultimately, that is playing into abuse, because that is in a way colluding with the abuse, because what that does is it contributes to the survivor being isolated, it contributes to the survivor not knowing what their rights are, not knowing what their options are, being dependent on the perpetrator because they don't have workers, they don't have anyone else to help them with their other needs.
Me and my partner were using drugs, and every time he didn't get his drugs, he'd throw me out, so I'd be out on the street. But he'd only take me back when I get money. So, I've been on the street before because of my addiction and being, with him really, which is violent, he was, but he died, so. My partner stopped me from getting support. If I had an appointment, he would keep me back from the appointment, and then I'd end up missing it because of the way we were. We were volatile, the pair of us. It just left me homeless, like being out on the street for days, sleeping in dustbins, round the back of dustbins and in people's doorways. And it was a horrible experience.
Though it's not safe to approach survivors and try and support them where perpetrators are present, what is even less safe is not to try and do that work, because what we were seeing was women in that situation or survivors in that situation, experiencing multiple disadvantages, surrounded by one or more perpetrators, they just were not coming into support. They were not getting access to domestic abuse support because there was no safe way to do it. So we realised that what we needed to do was find the least risky way of delivering that, both for the survivor and for the workers that were trying to do that. We've created guidance, we've created training, but that is just the start of a conversation which I think the sectors need to keep having. It's like, you know, how can we continue to do that partnership work more safely? How can we continue to reduce risk? Also, how can we make sure that there are more specialist services available for perpetrators who are experiencing multiple disadvantage, because without their basic needs being met and without them having support and compassion, it is very unlikely that we'll see behaviour change. So the one way that we need to make sure that we reduce risk is not just focusing all resources on the survivor. The perpetrator also, if they've got their own needs to have, you know, support and consistency around those as well. It remains, I think, really, really kind of risky practice at times to try and work in these situations, and always complex. But without trying to do this work, we would be not reaching a huge number of survivors who, you know, are in potentially life-threatening situations every day. And so I think we're doing the best we can to reduce risk and, you know, make that work as safe as possible for everyone involved.